Queerly beloved, we are gathered here to gay. Oh my god, y'all are gonna get so sick of the gay joke. The female sex scenes were so descriptive. What up, my channel? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are going to be talking about my top 10 LGBTQIA reads of 2019. Chosen for the way these works handled the exploration of queerness, the depiction of queerness, how rich it was, and for how much I personally connected to the queerness in the book. I agonized over this list, okay? It took me 2 weeks alone of actively every day visiting and revisiting this list, trying to figure out what my top 10 was, because there were so many books this year that touched me and validated me as a queer person, and there were so many books that addressed queerness in wonderfully rich and effulgent ways, and I had a really hard time coming up with this top 10 list, but I think I did a really good job of picking which 10 out of the 101 books I read in 2019 depicted queerness the best for me. I also was just stressed over what to wear for this video because I could not choose between my new pink flamingo bow tie and my Carol Danvers Captain Marvel bow tie, because they both are just such a specific and unique brand of gay. Sorry, I haven't had my breakfast yet, and this is my breakfast. But ultimately, I just decided to go with the flamingo. Petition to make the flamingo the gay mascot. All in favor, say gay. Oh my god, y'all are gonna get so sick of the gay jokes in this video. Coming in at number 10 on my list is Hot Dog Girl. Now, this is a very controversial read. There are so many polarizing opinions about it, and I will say that this book is absolutely not for everyone. This is a book about a teenager named Eloise. She goes by Lou, and her parents are no longer together. I can't remember if her mother abandoned her or if her mother passed away. I think she might have passed away. I read this book very early in 2019, so some of the details are a bit hazy. Feel free to correct me below. But Lou lives with her single father, who is just the sweetest, most caring and devoted man on the face of the planet. And she has wanted to be cast as a princess in her town's carnival. She feels like if she gets cast as an important figure in this carnival, then the guy that she's been pining over will finally frickin' notice her. And it's like, oh honey, if he hasn't noticed you by now, you're probably not gonna get noticed, but that's none of my business. But because that doesn't make for a great plot of the story, a girl realizing that it's just not gonna happen and accepting it and moving on with her life, we had to go through this YA hilarious contemporary journey of her trying to catch this boy's attention. And of course, instead of getting cast as the glamorous princess, she gets cast as a hot dog. Part of the reason that I connected so much to this story is because Lou is a freaking mess, okay? I just thought it was such an accurate depiction of what it's like to be freaking 17, you know? And Lou really has this pressure to make this last summer at home the best summer possible before everybody goes off to college and presumably loses touch and never sees each other again. And I remember feeling that pressure on my senior year to make it the best year ever, to stuff in all the things that I wanted to have the ultimate high school experience that we see in the 80s and the 90s and early 2000s films. I remember that pressure so freaking well. And when you're queer on top of it, that just adds another layer. You find out really early on in the book that the amusement park that Lou has loved ever since she was a child is closing, it's shutting down. And so she resolves to save this very, very important and special space, especially because it's where her parents met and fell in love. It's part of the reason that she exists at all. So seeing her not only fight for something she believed in, but also kind of come of age and have this just really hilarious journey was really special to me. I liked it. I enjoyed it so much. I laughed a lot, which is very freaking rare for me while reading. And thematically, I really liked the book because it centers a character who is very morally ambiguous. She's very, very morally gray. She makes decisions that are harmful to her friends. She centers herself when she shouldn't be centering herself. She's not a great friend. She's not a great person. But the reason that I enjoyed this was because you see her held accountable and you see her take accountability and responsibility for her actions. You see her grow. And I would much rather have a character who is problematic, who grows and acknowledges the ways that they have been trashed, than a character who's just made and drawn as perfect from the beginning and has very little actual growth or struggle in terms of their personality and development. I think a lot of people took issue with the fact that there is a cheating storyline in this book, but that didn't bother me because it also got addressed and was depicted as wrong. And then there is an issue with a queer girl being used to make a straight boy jealous. I get why that is an issue. I get why it is a sensitive topic. And for me, the reason why it wasn't so much of an issue is because that does get addressed in the book as well. But because I do believe in responsible recommendations, I know that these themes are very hurtful and harmful to a lot of readers to read. And so I want to be very upfront about them in case you do decide to pick up this book. The single dad rep meant the world to me because I want to see more representation for fatherhood and for healthy relationships between fathers and their children. I hate that as a society we love to pretend that fathers don't have any type of paternal instinct, that fathers aren't as invested in their children as mothers are, as if fathers don't undergo biological changes along with folks who reproduce and who carry the child. Like, it's just absolutely ridiculous, this notion that fathers are somehow less than in the lives of their children. And so anytime I see healthy representation for fatherhood and for a father-child bond, it just means the frickin' world to me. I think a part of the reason why I connected so much to the storyline of Lou trying to save this amusement park, this theme park, is because it reminded me so much of gentrification and how Black and brown people have been fighting for decades, especially in New York City, to save their cities from gentrification, from being pushed out of their cities by wealthy white people who are moving in and raising the rent and kicking them out of their homes and taking over their businesses. And I personally know how painful it feels to have part of your history, your neighborhood, your space taken from you. I haven't talked about this publicly at all, but my parents met and fell in love at the Bronx Zoo. They were both cooks there as kids. My father grew up in this building right next to the Bronx Zoo, and that building is currently being torn down and made into high-rise condos. The people who have lived in this building for years are being kicked out, displaced, and forced to move, including my elderly grandparents, who have lived in this building for over 34 years. So my grandparents, who are in their late 70s, now have to pack up their entire lives and move somewhere else. This building is no longer even going to exist anymore. And the levels of pain that houses for me is very, very specific. You know, the symbolization of how my parents met and fell in love, being raised and reconstructed in order to cater to economically privileged white folk is devastating. So long story short, I really enjoyed the book. Number 9 on my list is The Deep by River Solomon. If you've been following my platform, you are probably fairly surprised by this, because I read The Deep for my Black Girl Magic vlog, my last one, and I gave it 4 stars, and I talked in this vlog about how thematically it was brilliant, but I wasn't connecting with the story. Because I am reading this for the NB Book Club, the non-binary book club that I host over on Instagram, I decided to give it another try before the monthly discussion and reread it via audio. And the audio changed my frickin' life. River Solomon is a non-binary autistic author who produced Unkindness of Ghosts. And this book is their second book, and it's about the African peoples who were heartlessly tossed overboard ships during the transatlantic slave trade. And it's speculative realism on what would happen if those people, instead of drowning, had found a way to reproduce in the water and survived. So this book is about the Wajinru, who are descendants of the African peoples who were thrown overboard. And because they come from such a traumatic history, have developed incredibly small memories. This is a coping mechanism to keep from them having to remember the trauma that they were born from. And so what they do is they appoint one person to be the historian. This person is solely responsible for remembering the entire history of the Wajinru people. Pretty much speculative fiction on what it means to live in a society that believes in sacrificing others for the good of everybody else. So in this book, we follow Yetu, who is the current historian, and Yetu really struggles with being a historian. It's seen as an honor, but she does not want it. She doesn't want to be the historian. It's filled her with so much trauma. She's losing who she is, and she goes on a journey to alleviate herself from being the historian and to liberate her people. There's so much about this book that I can say. there was a line, "Forgetting is not the same as healing," and it shook me to my core because we so often act like forgetting something is a form of addressing it. Running away from conflict, running away from history and from trauma is exactly why those things get perpetuated. There's that quote, "If you ignore your history, you're doomed to repeat it." It's interesting to see the way that the Wajinru repeat their history because their avoidance of handling their trauma leads to them perpetuating that trauma on each other in various ways. And I feel like that was so well depicted between Yetu and her mother's relationship. I loved the representation for having a parent-child relationship where you both love each other, but one of you was toxic. But in terms of the queerness, oh my gosh, there is just rich and casual normalization of gender neutrality, of non-binary identity, and I just love that it was integrated into the story. This book is often referred to as a book about the Wajinru women. That is complete erasure of all of the trans binary and trans non-binary inclusion that is featured in this book. This is not a story about women, it's a story about people. The rich history of gender nonconformity in Africa loves getting swept under the rug and erased. There's also a really cool polyamory rep, intersex rep, and there's just so many different types of representation of queerness, and it's just all completely normalized and celebrated. I loved that Yetu's character represented what it means to be expected to be a spokesperson for your entire community, to be used as a tool to educate others against your will, because as a Black and non-binary and Mexican person, this is something that I'm used as very often, and it's so exploitive and degrading, and I love that this book showed exactly how harmful that can be to the person who's being used as a tool for education. Listening to the book via audio form was a good choice because it activated the storytelling. This book is told in the oral tradition, meaning that it was pretty much written to be heard. This is the case with a lot of books that are from the Afro diaspora because we got a rich history of spoken word, but of course audiobooks are not accessible for everybody. Then we have Her Royal Highness by Rachel Hawkins. I was not expecting to love this book as much as I did. I think this is the book that I laughed the most. Actually, no, I think Hot Dog Girl made me laugh more than this book, but I was cracking up. This is a YA contemporary. It's female. It's about two girls. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure the protagonist's name is Millie. We're gonna go with Millie. That seems right. But she's just like a really nerdy Ravenclaw girl who got her heart broken by the girl of her dreams, and she decides to go to a boarding school in Scotland. Once there in that lush setting, she meets Flora, who is just this aloof, super bitchy roommate who's just absolutely spoiled head to toe, and she finds out that Flora is spoiled because she's a princess. The princess of Scotland. So it starts as this kind of enemies relationship that morphs into a friendship that morphs into romance, and I just really loved the journey. It just felt so natural and so believable, and the characters were well fleshed, so well fleshed. One of my favorite things about the book was the representation for men who are straight but are not traditionally masculine, or who don't perform masculinity in the typical expected style. There's a male character who's heterosexual, and I just love seeing that representation for a guy who embodies masculinity in his own way. That was super cool. The relationship between Flora and Millie hit home for me. I thought it was super sweet, and I loved Flora's character. I was worried initially that she wouldn't be portrayed with depth, but she was just as well fleshed out as our protagonist, in my opinion. So often the pretty, privileged character just doesn't get explored, doesn't get given in-depth qualities and characterization, and I was really, really glad that that wasn't the case in Her Royal Highness. Flora really cares about her role as a princess. She takes it seriously. She doesn't see it as necessarily a burden. She loves her people. She's excited and ready to rule. Usually the representation that we get for royalty in books is like, oh my god, I don't want this, it's awful. And I just love seeing a different side of that conversation. Also, the Scotland setting was really cool. I don't know how great the representation of Scotland was because I am not Scottish. So if you are and have read the book, please let me know down below what you thought. Number 7 on this list is The Stars and the Blackest Between Them by Junauda Petrus. I read this for my Black Girl Magic series in December and I was absolutely blown away. I am so glad that I listened to this book on Scribd because this is another book that is told in the African oral tradition. Junauda is a spoken word artist by trade, and you definitely get that spoken word verse vibe when you're reading the book. This book follows two girls, Audrey and Mabel, as both of them come of age. So Audrey is a Trinidad girl, and when her homophobic mother catches her kissing her girlfriend, she sends Audrey to live with her father that she's never even met in Minneapolis.
But since girls will be girls,
Audrey ended up meeting Mabel, a 16-year-old Minneapolis girl, and of course they fell in love. One of my favorite things about this book was how incredible the themes were. One of the characters in this book has a life-threatening illness, and I loved how deeply that was explored and seeing how the illness affected the relationship between the two girls. One of the girls also begins writing letters to an inmate who is currently incarcerated, and issues of incarceration were explored so in depth, what it means to be alive and in prison, and how mass incarceration has affected our society, with special emphasis on the Black community. Just was incredibly well done. I just loved how every chapter, every part of the book was focused on a different zodiac sign. And the book talked so much about spiritual identity and religion, and how a lot of girls, a lot of queer people, a lot of Black people have turned away from religion and embraced spirituality and embraced their identities as celestial beings, because religion has been used historically to repeatedly oppress and dehumanize Black folks. And a lot of young people, millennials included, are just very, very exhausted with the kind of like oppressive history of religion. And I love how that was explored in this book as well. I talked in my Black Girl Magic vlog about the themes in this book in depth, so if you haven't seen my latest Black Girl Magic vlog, you should definitely watch that. But I think the theme that resonated most with me personally was how this book is about Black people reclaiming their relationship to nature. And what I mean by that is, because of slavery, Black people across the diaspora has developed this phobia of open plains, of the woods, of the dark, of water. Black Americans are significantly more likely to die from drowning, and that's 100% due to the fact that Black Americans historically have not been allowed to learn to swim, and a lot of us have a phobia of water because of slavery. And the same thing goes for woods and nature. It reminds us of plantations. It reminds us of being chased through the woods by dogs. It reminds us of being forced to work in the fields, and how throughout time, even though slavery has ended, that morphed into Black people just not doing things in nature, not riding horses, not learning how to swim, not going camping. That's why like jokes about how Black people don't go in the woods and how Black people don't camp are so rampant, because the relationship that we have with the earth has been effectively severed by colonialization and racism. In this book, you see Black people, a lot of Black characters, reclaim their relationship to nature, reclaim their identity as beings from nature, and that was so beautiful. It was just so beautifully done. And the celebration of queerness, there was this idea of queer worship, and how when you're queer and you love another queer person, that's a form of self-worship, and it's a form of queer worship overall. Love as a revolutionary act, especially in a world that doesn't want you to love the way that you want to love. Oh my gosh, it was just so beautiful. And like the female-female attraction, the intimate scenes, I adored everything about this book from page 1 all the way to the end of the book, with the exception of the representation for Trinidad. This book is excellent representation for Blackness, for queerness, for spiritualism, for nature, for all of these wonderful things, for incarceration and illness and sickness, for coming of age, but it's not good representation for being from Trinidad. There have been Trinidad reviewers who have talked about not feeling respected by the representation and being harmed by it. Make sure to mention that when you recommend this book. Just because something doesn't affect you personally doesn't mean it won't hurt somebody else. Now, number 6 on this list is none frickin' other than Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. This book was recently gifted to me. Thank you so freaking much for sending me this off of my wish list. This is a space opera about a young woman named Rosemary Harper, and she kind of schemes her way onto a ship called the Wayfarer. The Wayfarer is home to the wackiest crew in the galaxy. It's an interspecial crew, and each member is very, very distinct in personality and characteristics from one another, and all of them have to go on this journey to a very, very hostile planet. I have loved space operas since I was a kid. I grew up watching Firefly. The Fifth Element is my favorite movie of all time. Reading this book was an absolute blast. It was like you were there. The characters were so vivid. They leapt off the page at you, and the conversations that they had with one another were so enlightening, not only to who the characters were as people, but also just on a social level. There are so many themes in this book, parallels to social issues in our world, and I love being able to dissect a book. There's a lot of queerness, there's sapphic romance, there's non-binary inclusion and gender nonconformity, and representation for families that are polyamorous, and I absolutely loved it. It felt like a celebration of all the different ways that a person could exist in the universe. Even though it's science fiction, it's one of the most realistic depictions I've ever read of human beings. There were so many times where I laughed out loud in this book. There were times where it pushed me to tears. There were so many quotes that I wrote down. I would definitely say that Sissix is probably my favorite character. I also really, really love Jenks. Jenks has just the most vibrant personality, and I loved his relationship with the other characters. This is definitely a book about the journey versus the plot. One of my best friends read this book and they were like, they spent so little time on this actual planet when that was the whole point of the story. And it's not so much about the planet that they're going to, but it's about the bonds that they have formed and how those bonds get tested, and how the relationship of the Wayfarer crew changes once a new person is thrown into the mix. And I think that that is such a really cool thing to show off in a book. Because so often book plots are about a group of people becoming close or a group of people growing apart, as opposed to seeing how the dynamics of an already existing group are changed when somebody else is introduced. It just was so freaking cool, and I loved the alien civilizations and the technology. This book is just one of the most believable stories that I've ever read. It feels like these people and species and aliens do exist somewhere in our universe, and this is just like a nonfiction account of their antics. I absolutely loved this book. I'm so glad that I got it for Christmas. I can finally reread it and annotate it. Oh my gosh. I'm officially a Becky Chambers fan, and I will read anything that she writes. Number 5 on this list is Nama by Sarah Blake. It's a retelling of Noah and the Ark from the perspective of Noah's wife, Nama, who in the Bible was never given a name, and that's just symbolic to the erasure of women in history. And this book is what I would describe as magical realism about Nama having to be the matriarch for her family and hold her family together while the earth is being destroyed, and while she and her family are trying to survive and keep all the animals alive on the ark, and what happens after. This book did so many things that I never thought were possible. I am not a religious person, and the fact that I enjoyed this book so deeply and passionately just shows how fucking incredible it is. Sarah is, oh my god, just such a freaking phenomenal writer. She's a poet by trade, and I believe this is her debut novel. If I had picked this book up not knowing that this was a debut, there's no way I would have believed it. Her writing is so excellent. It feels like she has crafted this over the course of very many books. I am absolutely stunned with the quality of her writing. It is so beautiful. I'm gonna call it prosetic. It's like prosy and poetic put together. Nama has a lot of very hallucinatory dreams, and I love when dreams are incorporated in a story. And Nama explores a lot in this book. She explores what it means to be a woman, and I freaking loved that part of the story. I want to see more men and women explore what their gender means to them. I think that that is such a healthy habit that us gender non-conforming people are very used to, but I don't think that it's something that cis people are encouraged to do. And I think that when you know your own gender, when you know yourself and you've really thought about who you are and what your identity means, it's a lot easier for you to accept the identity of others. I think a lot of the people who are very transphobic and who are very hateful towards others just because of the demographic that they're from are that way in part because they've never sat down and asked themselves who they are. And so seeing somebody else unapologetically express their own identity makes people who haven't done that work very uncomfortable. While I could go on and on about this book from a literary perspective, the thing that I loved the most, if I'm gonna be honest, were the sex scenes. The female sex scenes were so descriptive and so raunchy, and I was just like,
Black kid blushing.
okay, just ugh. Sorry, I went down memory lane. Coming in at number 4 on this list is In the Dreamhouse by Carmen Maria Machado. If you enjoy the feeling of being punched in the face, definitely read this book. It's what you're looking for. This is a memoir by Carmen Maria Machado, who wrote Her Body and Other Parties, an anthology of stories about what it's like to be a woman in the modern world. But in this book, Carmen is recounting on a relationship that she had in her early 20s with another woman, and they moved into this house called the Dreamhouse. It starts with just how in love and passionate and raunchy and powerful and
Gay.
celebratory and incredible their relationship was, how they worshipped each other, how they were lost in each other, how there was so much love between one another. And it uses the concept of that white picket fence, right? That all-American dream, that perfect family, to explain just how incredible this relationship was at the beginning. And then throughout the course of the book, Carmen transforms that perfect family white picket fence house into a house of horrors because the relationship became very abusive. And so Carmen is taking us through this like dazzling gay relationship that everybody's envious of and showing what's happening behind closed doors. And this book is a memoir of her discussing not only her experience with queer abuse, but also themes of abuse within the LGBTQ community. There is this very toxic idea that exists, and it's that there's no abuse in queer relationships. Women can't abuse each other. Gay men can't abuse each other. Trans and bi and asexual folk, etc., can't abuse each other. And because of that idea, a lot of the toxicity and abuse and pain that exists in our queer relationships gets bypassed and it doesn't get taken seriously. She has these discussions in such a poignant and just gut-wrenching way. I cried my eyes out while reading this book. I was like shaking. No matter how many reviews that you have read that warn you about how heavy this book is, I don't think that you'll truly be ready, especially if you are a queer person who's been in an abusive relationship. This hit home for me on levels that I cannot even emphasize. So many parts of this book that I underlined and lines that I just read over and over and over and over again. And Carmen uses the concept of actual horror, as in like scary movie horror, as a way to talk about what it's like to experience partner abuse, domestic abuse, queer abuse. And that's part of the reason why the book hit home so heavily, because I'm a huge horror fan and I've used horror my whole life as a way to cope with trauma that I've experienced in my personal life. I've talked about this a lot on my Instagram too, how a lot of us who are fans of horror, scary movies, scary TV shows, etc., use things like vampires and ghosts and demons and serial killers and masked villains as a way to symbolize and then deal with trauma that we've experienced in our everyday life. For example, somebody who has anxiety might be really drawn to the Freddy Krueger movies because those movies are all about overcoming your fears. The book absolutely destroyed me. It was so well written, and it says a lot that I was in so much pain while reading this and still unable to put the damn book down. It was so, I feel awkward saying good, because what Carmen has experienced is awful. So I'm not saying her experience was good, because no, the way that she translated that experience and the way she took us through that experience and pulled us in was incredible. She is officially an auto-buy author for me.
She could write a grocery list and I would buy it.
Wow, we are down to my top 3 queer reads of 2019.
Holy fucking shit.
Coming in at number 3 is Patsy by Nicole Dennis Benn. This is an incredibly layered story about a young Jamaican woman named Patsy Patsy is forced to have a child that she does not want. She does not want to be a mother. She names the child True, and she begins to parent this child, even though all she really wants is to follow the love of her life, Cicely, to New York City. And Patsy wants nothing more than to be with her. So she does the unthinkable. She abandons her child. She leaves her child in the care of her mother, and she moves to New York in order to pursue the woman that she loves. When I say layered, I mean
fucking layered.
Notice when we talk on BookTube about enjoying morally ambiguous characters, it seems BookTube more enjoys characters that have made poor but pretty understandable choices versus characters who truly have a mix of good and bad morals. And so at the start of this book, Patsy chooses her moral of herself, her identity, her sexuality, her happiness, over her moral of community and family, which in my opinion is a truly ambiguous choice. So in this book, we follow both True and Patsy throughout the course of, I think, 10 or 15 years. You see exactly how Patsy's choices have affected True, and then you see Patsy's perspective as you're like, what the fuck? Why would you do this to your child? How could you do this to your child? How could you choose yourself over somebody that you carried in your own body? What I appreciated the most about this book was the author did such a good job building up both characters. Patsy has really, really severe mental health issues, and those issues 1000% contributed to her stepping out of True's life. So I loved Patsy's lesbianism, her queerness, and also it's only in New York City, it's only outside of Jamaica that Patsy is able to be out as queer. It's the only way that she's able to be in love with a woman publicly, and to remain in Jamaica means that she's closeted. You know, she's forced to be closeted, but she then has to learn what it means to be a Black queer person. There's a lot of racism in the LGBTQ community, and how a lot of queer people won't date Black folks, don't see Black people as beautiful or as good partners. And so seeing her navigate that really hit home for me. Also seeing her navigate what it means to be out as queer later in life, because the queer scene is all like clubs and bright colors and parties, and she's like, that's not me, that's not who I am. And that was a struggle that I really relate to, and I really enjoyed seeing her navigate. Her child, True, is also non-binary, and this was the most fucking amazing non-binary rep that I think I've ever read. It was incredible. I was rooting so hard for True. They mean so fucking much to me, and I wrote a post on Instagram about True being non-binary, and Nicole Dennis Ben liked the post, and I was like, hey. And on top of that, True is also queer, and so I loved that the book talked about queerness in families and intergenerational queerness. It also addresses immigration issues and the American dream, and how when immigrants of color move here, they quickly learn that that American dream was not designed for them. And so seeing all the barriers to success in America from a Jamaican lens was really, really dope. And how people assume that she's a thief or a criminal, or that she's not educated right off the bat, even though Patsy is wicked smart and very, very talented, but she's forced into servile positions because of her immigration status and because of what people see when they look at her. There just were so many fucking layers to this book. I could not believe it. People have mixed feelings on the ending. I loved it. I loved it. I can't say anything really without spoiling it, but I will say there is a lot of trauma in this book. There's a lot of heaviness, but there's also a lot of queer joy, a lot of love, a lot of people standing up for themselves and unlearning toxic behaviors and growing. You see Patsy grow, and Patsy does have to deal with the repercussions of her actions, which I really appreciated. With untreated mental illness, of course you are going to do things that hurt yourself and others, because you've never been taught how to love yourself and how to love others. There was this quote from The Deep that I wrote down that says, "She didn't mean to be so cruel, but what else was she to do with the violence inside of her?" And I feel like that quote applies so much to the choices that Patsy has made. Trigger warnings for sexual assault, for transphobia, for homophobia, for abandonment, for parental abandonment, for self-harm. And the self-harm rep really hit home for me, and I thought it was incredibly well done. I fucking loved this book. It's so good, you guys. And I highly recommend it, especially if you're looking for representation for older lesbians and for trans representation. Also, if you really want to be challenged by a character's decisions and motivations, like if you want some true moral ambiguity, Patsy is the book that you need to read. Coming in at number 2 on this list. Y'all told me to read the book. I kept putting it off. I was like, no, this book is not gonna be good. Y'all are bugging. And Brandy from Brandy's Books sent it to me for Christmas last year. I put it off. I finally read it in June of this year. And it broke me into little tiny pieces. And instead of helping me put myself back together, it was like,
nah, fuck you. Enjoy your pain, bitch.
And that book is Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I'm not gonna lie, this book lived up to the hype for me, and I liked it better than Circe. And if you don't know about this book, it centers the love of Achilles and his general Patroclus. Achilles, of course, being the famous Greek demigod who is invincible except for his heel. Once I finished this book, I almost reread it immediately. The writing, the characterization, the themes, queerness, the sex scenes, the romance. This is officially my favorite romance of all time. Officially. It's just my favorite couple of all time. There's honestly not that much I can say about this book other than it's amazing. It's amazing. You should read it. My heart is broken. And if you know anything about Greek mythology, which I do not, I know very little, but I still knew how Achilles' story ended. The book is built up so freaking well that you're just like, you know it's coming, but you keep thinking to yourself, somehow it'll end differently. God, it was so fucking good. It was so fucking good. One thing I will say for this book that I really enjoyed was the theme of being erased from your partner's life because of the fact that you're both queer. Patroclus gets erased from Achilles' life so many times throughout the story. His importance gets undermined by other people in order to favor Achilles' relationships with women. And I felt like that's so symbolic of what it means to be bisexual and pansexual, and also queer people who have been in the hospital, queer people who have been in relationships with each other, who love each other deeply, who weren't allowed into the room to see their hospitalized queer partner because they couldn't be married. The #1 queer book that I read in 2019 is Freshwater by Akwaeke Emesi. This book is by a non-binary author, and it is a spiritual realism book about Ada, who is a child that is born with gods inside of them. Born in Nigeria and eventually moving to America, where Ada endures unspeakable trauma, the entities and forces living inside Ada then decide to kind of take over and control Ada's life. And so the book is about Ada having to come to terms with having multiple entities inside of their body and what that means, while also trying to figure out who they are. This book is read by the author, and I listened to it on script. I kept rewinding and replaying just to hear the author say things again. And I can't wait to physically read it because I know that's gonna be a totally different experience. I haven't done that yet. It was like the author was talking to me. For me, this is the most personal representation, a depiction of my trans non-binary identity that I've ever read. I felt so seen and understood, and I loved Asugara. Asugara
is that bitch.
Okay. The trans representation in this book was off the fucking charts for me, and it hit home in so many ways. I loved, of course, that this book is rich in Nigerian storytelling. I personally think that this book was written for the people it was written for. And I know that doesn't make any sense, but if you read this book and it didn't resonate with you, you didn't connect to it, you didn't understand it, it's because it wasn't written for you, and that's okay. There are so many books that I read that other people have had really powerful connections to, and I'm just like, yeah, I didn't get that. That's because those books weren't written for me. But Akwaeke Emesi, they wrote this book for the people that needed it, and I fucking needed it. Especially because a lot of the representation that I see for non-binary identity is from a white lens. A person's experience with gender overall is influenced by their race and by their culture. So my experience as a non-binary person is informed by my race as a Black person. That's part of the reason why the representation for being non-binary hit me so hard, because it was intersected with Blackness. And I saw myself and my identity in a way that I have never been able to see it before. And so many things clicked in my head. Now I have a friend who's also non-binary and white, and they were like, yo, this book really, really spoke to me. So I think that if you are trans, whether you're trans non-binary or trans-binary, you should definitely pick this book up, because it was absolutely written with us in mind, and you feel it. And on top of that, the writing, like Akwaeke's writing is so fucking beautiful. It echoes. I found myself repeating lines from this book to myself over and over and over again just to hear them again. The experience I had while reading this book was If I could only reread one book out of all the books that I've read this year, this is the book that I would pick. I also just want to give huge congratulations for a Quick A because they recently had top surgery and I'm so happy for them. They posted on their Instagram kind of also standing up for themselves because a lot of people misgender them and use inappropriate terms for them. Seeing a non-binary author who I love so much stand up for themselves meant so much to me. So I just, no matter where Quick A is in the world, I just hope nothing but amazing things for them. Also, trigger warning for sexual violence in this book. Some of these books are going to make it onto my top 10 books of the year list. I would love it for you to guess down below which are gonna make it onto my top 10. After this, you're gonna see my top YA reads, my top 10 reads of the year, and books that wasted my time in 2019. Whew, I made this video long because I don't know when I'm gonna get the chance to gush about these books. I really love each of them. If you've read any of them and have thoughts, I would love to know down below. What was your top queer read of the year? Also, always looking for recommendations, especially for trans rep, especially trans non-binary rep. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned because I have a lot of list videos coming out in the next couple weeks. Like and subscribe if you have not already, and I will see you in my next one.